a 98% gender disparity is like fucking shocking.
So you caught on to this seemingly early. What made you start putting yourself out there on social media? What was the impetus?
I wanted to get into fitness, so I was the type of person who would constantly go to the gym for 2 weeks, fall off again, get really annoyed at myself, try again a month later, the cycle repeats. I started my Instagram as a faceless, nameless account. I just posted every day. I was just sharing my journey. So I literally put every single recipe I'd ever created at this point into 2 different ebooks, made myself a Shopify site and literally sold them for £5.
You're not sure if you're completely burnt out or, by social media standards, not quite productive enough.
It's understanding like how I recharge as a whole. It's understanding how to say no to things even if they sound like great things. A huge part of it as well as an entrepreneur has been hiring people that are better than me at what they do. Like, your team and your business is only ever as good as the people within it.
Hello, Grace.
Hello.
So nice to meet you.
Lovely to meet you too. Thank you for having me.
Absolute pleasure. Now, here we are sitting, talking hopefully a lot today about business and the inspiration behind your businesses. Mm-hmm. Let's look back to, it could be 50 years ago, probably actually could be 40, 30, maybe 20. This wouldn't be happening. Mm-hmm. Me sitting here talking to someone about business who is extremely young and a female. They're the sad truths. And actually, I probably wouldn't be presenting it because it would have been a bloke as well.
I mean, I think that you don't necessarily even need to look back 20 years. I mean, even just say topic of podcast talking about business, if you have a little look at the business podcast charts worldwide, not necessarily just UK. If you look at the funding stats in terms of women in business, 2% of VC funding going to women.
Wow.
Yeah, it's not like a far flung. I spent so much time thinking, and don't get me wrong, we've come so far, and we really have. But I spent so much time thinking, kind of, you know, oh, back then this wouldn't have happened. Back then this wouldn't have happened. The more I progress now, and I feel like this is kind of a universal experience. Like, the older you get, the more fierce you get about things like, you know, actually where we are now and it not being anywhere near good enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, just get more and more kind of angry about the state of things, really, which is, you know, it's worth saying as well that I, as part of this, am one of the like hugely privileged, like, kind of women in business when it comes to VC funding, when it comes to the stats around white women in comparison to black women for funding, for example, when it comes to the fact that, you know, I had a relatively quick trajectory in terms of, you know, social media or whatever it might be. But yeah, already off on a rant.
Good. That's what we want. We want ranting, especially about equality.
Doing anything else.
It's super important. And I think actually that frustration, anger, you know, I've certainly got those kinds of emotions around lots of different subjects, you know, whether it's mental health or people getting access to decent mental health care, whatever it might be. And I think actually if you can take that horrible feeling of anger and frustration and channel it into something good, the momentum is huge and you can do really good things with it. And it feels like that's what you're doing with your voice and your platform, is that you want to help other women get into business. But again, looking at the cold hard facts, certainly if you're starting up a new business, it's incredibly hard for women to do so. Just tell us why that is.
So there's a lot to it, and it's worth saying that I'm by no means an expert in terms of the, you know, the state of play and how it is at the moment and where it needs to get to. I was saying the other day, like, what we really need is a piece of research in terms of what would happen if we actually did invest in these women, which I'm not equipped to do. I'm not smart enough to at the time. I'm not in the like right space, but actually, you know, that's what we need to do to be able to actually get to the next level. But in terms of like this, what the situation, I guess, is at the moment, is the fact that yes, we've come forward hugely in terms of getting women into entrepreneurship, in terms of you'll see more and more women going freelance, being their own boss, a number of these different things. When it comes to entrepreneurship specifically, and this is a specific area that I spend a lot of time talking about, thinking about because this is specifically my area. Basically, what you often need to do to be able to grow a business, so different from being if you're self-employed, if you've started a business and you want to get it from A to B, you want to either exit it or you want to grow it to IPO, so go public, or you want to grow it in general, whatever it might be. The majority of the time you need funding. If you don't need funding, it's likely because you either have financial backing of your own or your family's or network as a whole, although that's probably a little bit more angel investing. But you're usually in an incredibly privileged position, or you're doing something that doesn't need funding from the beginning. So, for example, I started my first ever business was selling PDFs, so it didn't need funding because there was no cost that went into creating those PDFs other than £50 I've paid my friend who was a graphic design student in order to be able to make them look pretty.
And these were your PDFs that were giving out workouts?
Yes, so this was like, and even before that, there was a PDF I made of like recipes, and it was just Instagram content I was doing, and I was turning it into PDFs and selling them. But that obviously doesn't need funding because, you know, you don't need to pay to
create a product,
to create a product to be able to get your first bit of cash in the bank from the business. The majority of the time, though, if you're creating anything where you need to buy the product itself or you need to do any research and development into it or whatever it might be, you'll hear about people talking about getting funding to start their business or getting funding to take their business to the next level if they've been able to scale it a little bit already. There's a few different things you can rely on in terms of going for funding, but a lot of the time, there's generally kind of two main different routes. You can go for institutional funding, so that's like going to a venture capital or private equity, which is probably a little bit later, or just generally like funds that are put in place. Their job is to deploy capital to put into people's businesses. Just to keep that simple. On the other side, you can have angel investing. So that is when someone would go to either friends and family, if they're lucky enough to have friends and family that would happily put a bit of money into their business. More often, it's probably going to be this thing called angel investing, which is high net worth individuals, or, you know, it's slightly lower than considered high net worth individuals. You don't necessarily have to be. In the UK, you actually have to earn 100,000 in order to be able to angel invest. It's back down to 100,000 because we overturned the legislation last week that made it go up to 170,000.
Wow.
Yes, which meant that in some areas of the UK, 0 women could be angel investors.
Wow.
Yes, so that was overturned, literally.
And you helped with that campaign?
Yes.
That's incredible.
Thank you. We just got really, really angry, and this is why it is important to get really angry and not to see anything as like that feels like quite small in comparison to especially what's going on in the world at the moment. Like, it feels like a tiny thing to be getting angry about, but also when you're creating an environment in which in some place in the UK literally 0 women can invest in a world where we're making women rely on angel investing anyway, it's just completely dire. So that's now changed, which is fantastic. As of last weekend.
Good.
Yeah, but
it still seems, you know, thank you for so clearly laying that out for us, because it's you can see instantly how tricky it is, especially for women, to start a business. So what do? You've got a great idea. You know that there's an audience waiting for whatever it is, whether it's a product or a service. Where'd you go?
Literally, and what we're doing by not so the institutional area of that, where we're talking about VC funding, as I said, 2% of that goes to women in the UK. 2%.
Why is that?
So there's a number of different reasons. But I do want to say that, like, a 98% gender disparity is, like, fucking shocking. Like, that is so dire. And we see it as an entrepreneurship issue. So we see it as, like, you know, equivalent to why women don't get into certain roles or whatever it might be. But it's not an entrepreneurship issue because we also know that women hire more women. They pay women more. They put women in leadership positions even when they might, God forbid, have a child. Like, so we know that it basically exacerbates every other issue. So we're making women rely on this angel investing, which is essentially just saying, okay, you either need to be rich or you need to have a network filled with rich people, or you're not going to be able to fund your business. Like, that's literally what we're saying.
Is all people.
Right. Exactly. Like, the large majority of people are not able to go to their family and friends and be like, you got 10 grand you wouldn't mind putting into this business that I haven't proven to work yet. And there are whole things in place to mean that you have funding to be able to do things that haven't worked yet, because that's how businesses start. Anyway, there's so many different routes to it. And what makes me so incredibly frustrated, because I you know, have been one of the lucky ones who has got VC funding. And there will be a number of reasons for that. We were 2.5 years old and had already proven the business, so that was one of them. I also probably felt like one of the like, quote unquote, like, more accessible, like, less scary female investments, because, you know, I'm from a very privileged background and went to Oxford and like all of these things that they were probably like, oh, a little bit less spicy, you know? Like, which is terrible in itself.
I love your honesty around that. Like, let's talk about all of this stuff and look at the reasons why it's not happening for women.
Right, but the reason why, and it's so funny because every time I've gone on the news to talk about like how dire it is, because when people hear that 2% stat, they're like, oh, wow, that is terrible.
Yep.
And there's so much around kind of like, well, if you built a successful business, you'd get the funding. And it's like, bro, I've got the funding.
Yeah.
The point is that we as women cannot get funding. And you hear it as well. You hear it in the way that like people talk about female-owned businesses in the way that, you know, it's lovely businesses, but they're very like, they're home-centric businesses. They are candle-centric businesses. They are artisanal-centric businesses. They are like, where are the tech businesses? Where are the basically STEM-based businesses? Where are the science-based businesses? Like all of these things that are not getting funding because we are literally not investing in women. And it is so dire. And we make them rely on angel investing, which we know goes a lot slower, which we know is a lot harder if you don't have a great network. And then we raise the thresholds like we did last.
What the fuck do we do? I mean, I know obviously this is, you take great time and care to work out how we're going to make this an easier route for young female entrepreneurs, but what can we do about it? How will it change? So
what I really would love is for there to be a piece of research into it in order to be able to be like, how could we change this? We know that at the moment you can, you know, the women who are getting investing are hugely outperforming in terms of their returns and everything. So it's not, you know, yes, it's a smaller sample size, but give us the bigger sample size and we'll show you how that can improve elsewhere.
Correct, yeah.
But, you know, there's a huge amount of data to say that it's not a research-backed decision at all that would mean that we wouldn't want to invest in women. Not least because also women make products for women, which is a grossly underserved area. If you've read the book, like Invisible Women, you'll know that like so much of the world is built based on products for the norm, which was men, and actually there's like so much here that we can invest more into, and those products are likely going to be, you know, businesses are generally started by their target customer. So I started Tala because I wanted what Tala produces now, you know, that's the case a lot of the time, basically. So there's so much we can get out of it. In terms of what we can do, I do think getting angry is a big part of it, and it feels like quite a, you know, like yelling into the abyss, and like sometimes it is, but we saw last week overturning that legislation, for example, like it does have a positive effect.
Yeah.
There's, you know, I think we need to make this 2% statistic well known. I think that's a big part of it because, you know, we've seen in so many other gender gap issues now the need to report on those types of things. So public companies need to report on their diversity statistics in terms of, you know, like obviously the gender pay gaps for the same job are illegal, like all of these different things. I don't know what the best solution would be. All I know is that the current situation is dire, and until we make it very, very obvious that the current situation is dire, and until we like shout about it from the rooftops and basically make all VCs incredibly embarrassed if they don't have a more evenly allocated fund, then, and I think that the best way to do that is just to like really, really raise awareness at this stage. As I said, it feels like pretty shit being like, all we can do is raise awareness, because that's not all we can do. I do think though that the onus can not only be on women in order to fix it, because you know, it's not a women's issue, it's an investment issue, and therefore it needs to be fixed by the people who are sitting in the investment committees and in the rooms, of which I am not one. Like, I can invest as much as I can into female-owned businesses, but at the same time, like, I have nowhere near as much to deploy as these funds, where it is their job to deploy millions and millions every year to make businesses grow. So my current route is just like literally shouting as much as physically possible and getting it known, because I do think that the second people hear that 2% statistic, they're like, oh wow, that's crazy, that's like actually insane.
It's horrifying. How much does all of this drive what you're doing with your own businesses? Because I know you don't want to sit there going, I have to prove to the world that women can run successful businesses. But there must be a bit of that fire in your belly that makes you get out of bed in the morning and go, I'm going to do my absolute best to make this, out of the companies you've got, the best and the biggest they can be.
100%. I mean, there is a significant part of it. I mean, I believe hugely in the businesses and their routes to success as it is. And so I'm not like I don't get up in the morning wanting to prove people wrong. I get up in the morning wanting to make the businesses the best they can be. As I've said, I'm the target customer as well, so I literally want these businesses. Like, I want them to make what they're making, and I want them to grow, and I want them to do what they're doing better than what I feel like is currently out there. I do think there's a part of it in a way that, you know, with Tala, for example, with clothing, I do find it incredible, in not necessarily the greatest way, how many women's clothing companies are owned and run by men. Like, that seems like a disconnect. It's not even like it just seems like a disconnect.
Well, if you put it the other
does.
way around, if you were to say all men's shaving razor companies are female owned, you'd go, well, that's a bit weird.
But also, like, how do they know what we want from this? Like,
they don't.
But also, when you're talking about clothing, you're literally talking about, like, how my boobs sit, how my crotch feels in this legging, like, how thick the gusset is, like, whether
that's
it's
a very important
gusset,
thing, yes.
like, all of these various different things, and it's like,
the gusset is a real point that we need to
and, like,
talk
we
about.
sit there at Tala for we will debate a gusset for hours.
Too right.
And, like, I agree, too right, and I think that that's how women's clothing should be made.
But
I do
it won't
think
be when
right,
it's not
exactly.
female-owned.
And I do feel like that's you know, we were preparing our stats for International Women's Day, because at Tala every day is International Women's Day, and we were, you know, going through the fact that, like, our board is 100% women. Like, when we're sitting there designing the clothes, it is by women for women. Like, it's very much in a, like, why we're about to come out with this shirt, for example, and, like, at the moment I'd be like, I just hate the fact that, like, the shirt was originally made for, it was originally a product made for men. We've got it as part of, like, this androgynous look. We've changed it into a blouse. I want to wear a white shirt to do, like, I want to dress it up. I want to throw it over activewear to, like, dress it down and just go to the shops. I want to do all of these things. Why does a shirt not do all of those different things? It does, like, I know a white shirt is super versatile, but I have to have a different white shirt for if I want to dress it up, dress it down, whatever it might be. So we sit there and we go, okay, well, my most annoying thing is X. My most annoying thing is the fact that I want to tuck it in at the front and not tuck it in at the back, and then we make the side slits longer so that you can do that.
I'm so about that tuck, by the way.
I know,
I love that
completely
tuck.
agree. And I'm like, why is it so low at the side so I can't actually do that tuck? I want to, like, if I'm wearing a shirt, I like to roll my sleeves up, but I want them to stay up, so we've added an extra button so that it actually
that's
stays
a good
up.
idea.
Like, all of these things, I cannot imagine the company working in the same way in the design room, with that being, like, we make products exclusively for women. Like, we are, and there are so many companies that do that, and they are exclusively owned and run by men. Especially within, like, the activewear industry, that gets even more up close and personal.
Yes, it does.
And that's how Tala started, and we were in that industry, and we're, like, looking at every single one of our competitors, and it is all male owned and run. And, like, to me, there's an element of that not even on the point of, like, funding, but, like, hey, I trust my friend to design a bodysuit that's going to work well for me over
it's making me think, like,
down the road.
Wait, who's designing tampons? I want to know who's designing those guys, because that's really up close and personal. Do you know what I mean? Like, who's designing that stuff?
Right.
I'd like to know that it was someone that actually has to insert one.
Right. Agree. And I also think that as part of this, it feels, I don't know, I feel like a misery, even, like, talking about it. Like, it feels like one of those things where you're like, oh, I said I wouldn't grow up to be like that. But I also feel
this
like
is life.
Yeah, but also, like, if we're in a world where, like, consumption is a significant part of it, and, you know, we generally believe that, you know, if we wear something, we want it to do X, Y, and Z, or if we're using something, we want it to do X, Y, and Z. Like, when I'm wearing clothes, there is an inherent part of that is, you know, that I want to have been designed by someone who also experiences the same things as me. Like, that's why representation in general, not just in this sense, is so important.
Yeah.
And so it kind of, the more you think about it, the more I think throughout this wasn't even one of the, like, reasons for being at the beginning. And then I think just, like, more and more, if we've done this, we've kind of been like, oh, this actually doesn't make sense at all. I mean, you know, you speak about things like even tech that's made, so, like, period tracking, for example, like, those types of apps. Like, there was one of the biggest ones in the US sold the data and it wasn't owned and run by women. And then you just start thinking, actually, this isn't just a, like, preferences thing. This is, like, that's dangerous. When you look at Roe v. Wade and you look at what's happened with Roe v. Wade, this is now that's dangerous.
Yeah.
Because if someone's got their period tracking and they're putting in that data,
That is very dystopian and
Isn't
making
it?
me feel squeamish in all areas.
Yeah, so there's different levels to it, and like by no means do I think that we're like saving the world by making
No,
leggings.
but you're doing something really positive.
But I do think there's an element in, you know, probably a bit cliche, but being the change you want to see, and like
Of course.
very much just like I want a pair of leggings where the person who was designing them has also worn pairs of leggings that they felt all of these three problems with.
But also to see young women out there today, or even kids at school, like my daughter's age, to know that they will have an even playing field when it comes to having ideas and seeing them come to fruition, which is not to say that it's necessarily extremely easy for men. It's hard to start a business anyway, but 2 versus 98% disparity means that you feel hopeless. But to know that young women down the line, hopefully, because you're shouting about it alongside other people, to give that equilibrium and that necessary equality, that's huge. We need that.
Yeah, and you don't just feel hopeless, you feel like it's not a viable route. And like I think that there's an element of it as well that like it was a viable route for me because of a number of reasons that probably make me the exception in this scenario. Like, as I've said, like I probably was the less scary option, and therefore like it's, you know, I am able to be invested in for like these specific reasons. And like God forbid that's not the case for someone else and they have like this amazing idea, and like everyone should be pro amazing businesses being started. Like, full stop. It's not about men and women. Like, it's not about, like, everyone should be pro great businesses being started, whether they have a not-for-profit angle, whether they have a purpose angle, whether they have a tech angle, whether they make things easier for us, like, whether they're just clothes, like, whatever it might be. Better businesses should always be welcome. And what we're currently doing, it's not about backing poor businesses. It's about the fact that, like, think how many people will not get into entrepreneurship because they know this stat. And there's an element of me where I'm like, maybe I should shout about it less because it's going to put people off. And it's like, no, we need to shout about it, we need to change it. And then we need to make people think, do you know what? I want to leave school and I want to do 3 years in this and then I want to become an entrepreneur. And that's always been seen as an option. Well, it's never been seen as an option for women. It was definitely never spoken about as an option in any scenario.
If I look back at my nans, they didn't even work. They were kind of
you
weren't
own
allowed.
A house if you weren't married, like literally less than 40 years ago.
Yeah, that's not long ago. So we're really in the depths of it still and trying to unpick it and work out how to see this positive change. So for any listeners that don't know your route to where you're at today, so you were, I've heard you described as one of the OG influencers.
Well, thank you so much.
This is such an interesting topic for me because I'm obviously a hell of a lot older than you. And when social media came about, I was kind of slow on the uptake. Like, what is this? And I think my brother-in-law said to me, oh, you should try Instagram. And I'm thinking, what the hell is all of this? So I was really behind, and I've sort of had to catch up because whether we like it or not, so much of what many of us do for a living, you know, transpires online, and we're communicating with people online. So you caught on to this seemingly early. So what was the thinking behind becoming I suppose you didn't know you were going to become an influencer, but what made you start putting yourself out there on social media? What was the impetus?
So I started on social media in 2015. It was literally a week after my 18th birthday, and I wanted to get into fitness. So I was the type of person who would constantly go to the gym for 2 weeks, fall off again, get really annoyed at myself, try again a month later, the cycle repeats. And I thought if I basically could keep myself accountable, then I would be more likely to stick to it. So I started my Instagram as a faceless, nameless account. And I just posted every day, whether I went to the gym or not, what I had cooked. I was just sharing my journey. It was an accountability diary, essentially. I didn't show my face until I had 10,000 followers, or my name. So that was like definitely at the beginning was obviously very different from how it was now.
But for you to even get from like no followers to 10,000 is quite something. What do you think gave you that momentum?
So I've thought about it a lot, and I think that especially at the time, because like I thought I I probably was like, yeah, it's because I know it really well. I'm being 18. But actually, you know, it was probably blind luck and being in a situation where actually at the time, the influencers were people who were known for something already. So actors, models, musicians, etc. Like those were the people with big followings on social media. And we were very much at the beginning of starting to see people pop up for whether it was Vine, whether it was generally through social media, whatever it might be. It wasn't a kind of common occurrence. So I didn't see that as like an end goal because it wasn't a thing at the time. I think what happened though was because, do you remember that Instagram, like at the very beginning, was very polished?
Yeah.
It was very almost like magazine-y. It was, you know, we had tabloids because that was the only insight into people's lives, and then people would put it on social media and it would still be very polished, and it was a very like, yeah, it was just very different from how it is now. Don't get me wrong, Instagram is obviously still very much a highlight reel, but like that was it wasn't something that we perceived at the time to be normal to, I don't know, put up, whether it was like a no makeup selfie or even just showing what you were doing in your day. So I think there was an element of that like, because I didn't have my name on my face, it was like so shamelessly like, fucked it again today. Didn't go to the gym, went to my friend's house instead, and like gonna get back on it tomorrow and all of this. Like it was a very kind of open and just completely transparent journal, I guess. That camera's turned off, is it meant to?
It weirdly goes off after half an hour. We don't know why, but it just keeps recording. It's really
Perfect.
weird. It puts me off every week, and I go, just ignore it. Just fucking
Perfect.
ignore it.
No worries
It's really
at all.
annoying, but well spotted. What a pro.
That's okay.
What a pro. I'm also doing the maths in my head and going, 2015. I think I was 34. That's fucking depressing. Anyway, you were literally a teenager. Anyway, I was really old and you were not. Because I talk to everyone just thinking we're all the same age, and then it's stark facts like that where I go, no, I was a grown-ass adult with children.
I think I'm the same age as everyone as well. Literally no matter.
God almighty. So you're building up this following. At what point do you go, business? This is now a monetized thing. We're in business, guys.
So I actually monetized it before I even thought it was a business, for sure. I monetized it about, I'd say, 3 months after I hit 10k. And again, it was very, I don't say like not the done thing because I'm like, it wasn't the done thing, I was the first one to do it, but more it was at the time, like there was not a lot that you could do functionality wise on Instagram, and it was like you couldn't post. I started YouTube literally just because you couldn't post more than 15-second videos on Instagram, and I was doing like workout videos, but at the time I'd been posting what I would do every single weekend once it started to take off. So once I'd got past that 10,000 follower mark, I thought I was the hottest shit in the world, and therefore I was like, I'm really going to lean into this. I'm going to see, you know, like I'm going to get to where, like however far I can get all of this. And what I was spending a lot of time doing at that time was like showing what recipes I was cooking. So I would every single weekend I was doing so I left school or left college at that point because I was 18. I then went to I started an internship at IBM that I did for a year before I went to university, and I started that in the July. And so what I would be doing is I was obviously working a corporate job in the week. I was never home when it was daylight because unfortunately we live in the UK, and so I would be like making these meals and they would literally look like slop, like they'd look so disgusting. And so what I'd do at the weekend is I'd like bulk 8 hours a day. I'd just like cook recipe after recipe after recipe so that I would have things to post during the week.
So where does that come from? Because that's, you know, certainly at that age, if I think of myself at that age, I was working, but I certainly didn't have that mindset to be like, I'm going to use every minute to ensure that I'm boosting this side hustle. Let's call it, I know you talked about side hustling a lot, and we'll get onto the pros and cons of that a bit later maybe, but yeah, where does that drive come from? Is that something you learned growing up, or is that just you turned up like this is your nature?
I think it's very much in my nature. I'm very much like a strengthen your strengths person. I believe very strongly in riding the wave, and the wave was being ridden.
I love it.
I was very much like, I don't think, because that's what's funny is that like I don't look back and think I was like, I'm going to get to 100k, I'm going to get to like, it was very much like, this is working, therefore do more of this. Like, just, you're showing me green light, I will do more of that.
Yeah.
And so I was doing that, but then I was completely burning myself out because I was getting up at like 5 a.m. because I wanted to go to the gym before work and be able to actually keep up with this fitness journey that I'd like stuck to. And then I wanted to, post content. I was working obviously at IBM during the day, and that often went on quite late. So I was just like really burning the candle at both ends. So I remember thinking like, I can't continue to do this when I was also on an intern salary. And I was like, I have no time at the weekend to, earn anything extra. I have essentially I need to monetize this somehow. And also people were consuming it. And so I was like, well, it makes sense. If people want it, people want it. If they don't, they don't. So I literally put every single recipe I'd ever created at this point into 2 different ebooks, one a sweet ebook and one a savoury ebook. As I said, paid 50 quid to my friend to mock it up into a PDF, make it look nice, made myself a Shopify site and literally sold them for £5. So
genius.
I literally just put them up there. You can put like a digital plugin so that anytime anyone comes and checks out, it just goes straight to their email. So it was just automated, and I thought it was a really great idea because I was just like, this stuff is already on my Instagram, but I know I would pay £5 if I found an Instagram I liked and I wanted all of their recipes in one, so that rather than scrolling through their Instagram, I could actually flick through and I could see it in order and I could see the full method and all of that.
Yeah.
And so it was basically just like a slightly monetized PDF blog, basically. So I did that. That was the case for a year. That was all I sold, and all, that was kind of, I didn't think of it as a business at all. And then I went to university the following year. And at that point, I think when I went to university, I think I had just hit 100,000 followers. And I think that because I had this very overwhelming sense of having made it at this point, and me going to university, like, they won't know what to do with me.
I love it.
Out of control. Whereas, I feel like it wasn't perceived as very cool at all. Anyway.
But you had that like business in your bones. You knew that you could, condense what you were doing, distill it down, put a book online. You were thinking outside the box from a young age, I would say.
I'd say that's probably fair. And I'd say that it was, as I said, it was this kind of like strengthen your strengths. What can you get more out of? Like, if you're putting in 8 hours a day every weekend and you're also getting up at 5 and doing this job and then commuting for an hour and a half home and like all of this, like, how can you get more out of what you're already doing? I think that's very ingrained in my mindset.
Yeah, I've got that too. And I think I've always been aware that I'm not the best at anything, but I will really work at the things I know I'm capable of. So there'll be people out there who are better than me at all sorts of things, but I will work as hard as I can, and not in sort of a martyrdom way. I genuinely enjoy really pushing myself and seeing what my boundaries are, like what my capabilities are and how I can push myself. And I think that always feels really exciting, that you're not just flying on I'm never like, I'm just flying on this talent that I was born with. Not at all. I think I have to work so hard to do particularly well at any of the things that I'm doing.
Well, it's so funny that you say that, because I particularly think that like I know for sure that I have definite strengths. So I know I'm particularly good at marketing. I know that I'm particularly good when it comes to like product for a specific audience. Like, I know that there is certain strengths that I have that I do think like are my particular strengths. But I would say actually what my career has been like, at least started off in terms of things like social media and content creation, all of these things, I would categorically say that I have never been good at those things. And it was more being able to like lean into what did work that fit my skill set. So for example, I've never created pretty content. Like, if you go down my feed at any stage, there's going to be like nothing that was ever like visually appealing in any way. And like, I used to get so like at myself about it, kind of just being like, oh, like, look at all these beautiful like pieces of content that people are putting out.
It's
and all
boring.
of this.
I don't like beautiful content. It's so boring.
But like, I completely agree in the way that like I know I will, like, I know I can outwork. Like, there's one thing I know I can do, and like I will put in the sheer effort and hours like 10 times over, whether that is, you know, on whatever direction that might be in. And I think that's a really valuable lesson.
I mean, you're now running extremely successful businesses. And I mean, I'm using the word successful in a very full-bodied way. They're absolutely nailing it. And they're all doing brilliantly. Coming from that influencer territory and knowing how powerful social media is, and being, you know, because that was established prior to your businesses, you are the face of these brands, whether you like it or not. And there are loads of brands out there that are completely faceless and you don't know who owns them, what's going on with them. You can't ever pin one person down to be accountable for decisions made. How do you juggle that pressure? Because social media is an absolute, like, it's the Wild West. It still is. It's still pretty ungoverned. There are some rules, but they're not necessarily abided by. It's really full on. And if so much of where you've come from and how you translate what your businesses are online, how do you navigate that? How do you switch off from that?
Yeah, I think it's a really good question. I think it's something that I like very much had to put in place boundaries wise in order to be able to kind of move forwards and not completely burn the candle at two ends and like ruin my mental health. I think that, you know, there's an element of the fact that like I don't believe social media is a good place for people pleasers, and I'm like very much a people pleaser, and then throw a business in there as well that you cannot have control over like all of the different elements. Like, it's an absolute nightmare and you're always going to be unhappy if that's like what you're kind of aiming for. I think one of the like key decisions in protecting or setting those boundaries in order that, yes, as you say, to a certain amount of people I will be the face of these businesses, like whether I like it or not. I think that a big decision that made that better is that when I came out of university, I basically felt like I'd decided my career without even really meaning to. And, you know, more based on this kind of concept of just working at what worked and just like keeping on pushing at what worked, and felt like I'd become, you know, a social media influencer, which I have nothing against at all, but as I said, I don't feel like it fit within my skill set. And more so to that, I think that it fit directly in my like violation of boundaries when it comes to like being a people pleaser. And if I'm constantly relying on like having to be liked in order to make a living, that was never going to be good for me. And so like at that point, I did make a decision to like I deleted all of my videos on YouTube. I moved back from posting at all. Like, there was a good 2 years where I did not give anyone what they wanted in terms of like I was just terrible in terms of content and all of that. And that was like a very conscious decision. And what I did at that point is I restructured the businesses as well, so that they were, because I think what happens is if you start a business with a social media following, you get a huge advantage in so many ways. You get the following themselves. Yep. They're, you know, they're waiting. They're, you know, I would always recommend to, if you're starting a business without a face of it, for example, I'd always recommend to do some, you know, lead generation and really get that audience before you've even announce the product and all of this. And like when you're an influencer, you have that, but you also have to launch at scale. Having never made a sale before, you have to fulfill all of those things without ever having practiced from the point that you launch. And I also think there's like a laziness to it in the way you set up the business, in that it can rely on this lack of needing to establish itself in any other way. And I was really worried that the businesses would just become synonymous with myself, when I thought that they had so much more headroom to them. I think that these businesses are amazing, and I think that they should be able to disrupt industries and go far, far beyond me. And at a point that I made a decision that I didn't necessarily want to grow on social media and would move away from ever intentionally doing content to that direction, I needed to give the businesses a platform in which they could grow. So I restructured the businesses entirely at that point, and kind of essentially the whole idea was to mean that they would have a springboard to be able to actually build themselves almost from scratch in terms of everything internally, in order to be able to be great businesses, whether people knew it as me or not. So of course, if you come via my page, you'll absolutely see the direct association. But even when we look at Tala's following, for example, there's like maximum 30% crossover in terms of like the people who even know me and all of that, which was like a huge part of the intention behind this. And it had a huge negative effect on the businesses at the time. But I just knew that at that point I was like, I will never be happy if I am running these businesses based on whether people like me or not. Like, that is completely incompatible with how I want to live my life. Yeah. It's completely incompatible with my personality type. I would rather...
I don't think it's compatible for any human.
No, and I think it's really, really, really... Like, don't get me wrong, like, it's obviously an amazing job to have in so many ways, and sometimes I'll be, like, sitting there in, like, a terrible board meeting, and I'll be like, why? Like, you could be on a beach.
Yeah.
You know, with some gifted
But
things.
I want to talk about this
And,
because you wrote a book, Working Hard, Hardly Working, which totally dives into this subject matter of being successful yet not burning yourself out and knowing what your strengths are and putting boundaries in place so that you don't completely crumble and burn out emotionally, physically, mentally. How do you juggle that now? Because you've got, was it 3 businesses that are all running simultaneously, all doing brilliantly, as well as just having a life? How are you juggling that and not burning out? Are you able to work the hours that you would like? Are you able to balance it so that you can see your friends, see your family, be idle and do absolutely nothing?
Yeah, so I think that, you know, like being perfectly honest, I'm at a place now that I am really, really happy with. And every time I say that, I just know that something shit's about to happen.
But
it's always like every time I feel like I'm like, do you know what?
It's just a little test from the universe. That's what the universe does. It goes, oh, they're fine. I'm going to teach them a really cool lesson. And it feels like crap, but it's really good. I've had all the shit bombs.
Yeah, I'll keep that in
have.
mind.
Yeah.
I'll keep that in mind with the next one.
It's all growth.
It is, absolutely. It's all growth. And, well, what was the question?
About balance.
Yes.
So just looking at like not hitting burnout, you're running 3 successful businesses. The onus is on you. If they're not doing well, you can't run and hide. They're your babies. You want them to succeed. Yet you don't want to hit burnout. And I think also it's a very Western but also very British thing for us to boast about how busy we are. Some people do that, not everybody. Or just be absolutely drowning in tiredness because you're pushing yourself. And you say in the book, we are at this sort of strange point where you're either, or you're not sure if you're completely burnt out or by social media standards not quite productive enough.
Right.
Some of us are just like, I don't know which one I am. I'm sort of burnt out, but also am I doing enough? I'm not achieving enough. And we're all a bit sort of lost in that, maybe.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think it's a hugely important topic when it comes to actually like diving into where you sit within that and what our own boundaries are, and like understanding that self-care is a form of productivity, and you cannot have productivity without self-care, but also you cannot have self-care without being productive. Like sometimes self-care is about reaching that deadline that you said you would reach 3 times and now, you know, you're letting it not happen again. Like there are 2 sides of this, and it's really hard to know on social media. I think one of the biggest issues is the fact that you're talking to so many people, whether it's you specifically or whether it's in general. You're talking to so many people and you don't know if that person needs a little push at that moment or if they do need to sit back or whatever it might be. I think in terms of what I've done to be able to get to a point where I, at the moment, and like, you know, comes in waves, but at the moment feel like I've got a good balance of, you know, what I'm happy with. It's a number of different things. It's understanding that balance is not a 50-50 at all. I've understood that I am the type of person who, like, if my work is a type of thing that if I've set up my work in the right way, then I really love what I'm doing, and like that doesn't need to be the same for everyone. And some people can think that going home at 7 from the office is like terrible, but actually like I love work in lots of ways, and I'm really, really fortunate to be in the position I'm in, working on something so amazing, and like why shouldn't I love it? And actually knowing that actually that doesn't need to be. My mum said something the other day that like really resonated with me. Someone had said to her, she's like, you're never happy, you're always wanting to go to the like next thing, and you've just finished this one and now you want to do this one, and like you just need to, and she was like, no, you don't understand, I'm happy because I'm doing all of these things all the time. And I was like, oh my god, that's me. I've always like ingrained it in the way where I think that like there's something wrong with me because I'm wanting to do the next thing and go on to the next thing and like aim for whatever it might be, and I like scold myself constantly like, you should just do this, you should just do this. And actually we are all different types of people, and actually if that's what's making me feel energized at the moment, like that's absolutely fine, and that's a hugely fortunate position to be in. And like great, if the thing that you enjoy can also be the thing that makes you money, and like all of these things, don't get me wrong, you're not going to enjoy every day of it, but it is, you know, it's a great position to be in. I think boundaries are a huge part.
How are you with those?
I have got better and better, and I think that, you know, running a company, you can't have a certain amount of boundaries because if it needs you, it needs you. But I also think that you can have the rest of the you can't use that as an excuse to not set any boundaries the rest of the time. So for example, I have some really hard and fast rules around like how I spend my week. So on weeknights I will only do things 2 days. Like, I will not go any further than that. And like, if it looks like I'm free on those extra days, I'm not free. Like, that's time for myself. And I know the second I go over that threshold is the second that everything will be affected.
Yeah.
Work, home life, personal tasks, like whatever it might be. I know that I cannot go over that threshold. So it's a 1 in, 1 out process. It's understanding like how I recharge as a whole. It's understanding how to say no to things, even if they sound like great things, because you've got too many things in that week or whatever it might be. A huge part of it as well as an entrepreneur has been hiring people that are better than me at what they do. Like, your team and your business is only ever as good as the people within it, and like learning to hire really fantastic people and relinquish control and delegate effectively has been without a doubt the best thing for my mental health, but also for the business. I think that there is, you know, even at a managerial level, so not even looking at like the entrepreneurship kind of angle, we're ingrained with this kind of fear that makes us hire people that are not as good as us. Like, it's seen as this, it's like a protection mechanism, because you don't want to feel worse about yourself and you don't want to feel replaceable. But actually, I think that there's a huge amount of value in always hiring the best person that you could possibly hire. And like, if that means that they can take over like all of this and they can make you be able to do something else or whatever it might be, fantastic. Mm-hmm. I just think that like that shift in my mindset in order to be able to hire the best people we can possibly afford at any stage has been so important, because the business is only as good as those people. And actually, I am by no means and have never considered myself an expert in anything other than being the target customer and knowing how to talk to myself then and make products for myself then. But other than that, I'm not an expert on international expansion. I'm not an expert on website. I'm not an expert on finance, like any of these things. And like, the business isn't going to be an expert on these things until it has an expert in place. Mm-hmm. And like, that's been a very gradual journey. We're about to turn 5 at Tala, for example. And like, there are still roles that I would wish we could have, and we're just not there yet. And like, of course, that's gradual. And of course, 5 years ago, we would not have been able to afford those people. But actually, being able to delegate and relinquish control has been so important in order to mean that the business is not me.
Yeah, well, it goes back to looking at your strengths again and knowing that you can play to them. I'm the same with, you know, like Anushka, who edits the podcast. I can't edit a podcast. I haven't got a fucking clue. But I, if I then work with someone who's brilliant at what they do, I've got more time and energy to go, right, how am I going to research this podcast as well as I can? How am I going to create a new idea for something? It's about really playing to your strengths rather than trying to be everything for everybody, which is ultimately going to lead you to burnout.
Yeah, exactly.
So a couple of things I want to ask you. One is about, because obviously you're big on productivity, the productivity method, and using a pen and paper, which, as you can see by my little notepad, is a huge deal for me. If there's someone listening to this right now who feels apathetic, unmotivated, just meh, like we've all been through it, when you just feel like, I don't care, I don't know, I don't want to get out of bed, what would your first step be to motivating yourself and getting into a productive mindset?
So I always talk about the fact that motivation purely comes down to habits. Like, habits are the backstop for all motivation. You cannot, like, no one wakes up and feels motivated first thing in the morning, or some people do. I personally do not at all. It all comes down to habits. Like, even just you getting out of bed and brushing your teeth and washing your face, like, those are habits. So the more things that put you in a productive mindset that become habits, the better. So the productivity method itself is based on a few very simple kind of methodologies. So a few very simple processes. So the first one is to make sure that every single day you are writing down your to-do list, but it's not going to be a to-do list. It's not going to be an endless list of things, and you've got kind of like washing your hair and sending a really important email on the same list, weighted to the same importance, when you know that if you just washed your hair today, it probably wouldn't actually be a successful day. You're going to split that to-do list into quick ticks, tasks, and projects.
Love. Do you know how much I love lists? You are speaking like I'm almost salivating. Lists to me are the cornerstone to sanity.
But they are the cornerstone, and there are scientific reasons behind why they are the cornerstone, because when you go about your day and you race into your day and you starting something straight away without having done this before, you are depriving your body of the dopamine hit it needs by defining what success is. So I need to send this email and then ticking that off.
Oh, that
without
tick.
that
tick.
What dreams are made of?
I can't. I do a full line through and a tick, done, dead to me. Heaven.
Wow. Love
Is
it.
there a better feeling?
No, I don't think there is. But it's also like when you start to realise that it's like your body actually needs it. Like you need that dopamine hit of being like, I have done that task. And if you race into your day feeling like a headless chicken without having got through all of these things, then you are literally depriving yourself of the dopamine hit that you need by defining what success is, aka writing out your to-do list, and ticking it off, achieving success. Like,
are you
it's
the
that
sort of
simple.
person that you've got to do the worst thing first? Like, one of my friends said her husband, I'm going to give them a shout out, Liz and Al. Al said to Liz, his saying is, eat your frogs.
Eat the frog.
Eat the frog first. I don't really get the analogy, but I understand the sentiment. Do the worst thing first.
Yes.
Is that a good idea?
I think you'll know if it's a good idea for you. Some people do need a warm-up, and I think that we shouldn't, like, shame people for not all productivity methods working for them. I think that the point behind it is the fact that, like, you gather proof that you can also do today.
Yeah.
So, like, first of all, you've got the worst task done. That's amazing. By, like, 9:15, you're already feeling,
Heaven.
like, pretty good about yourself. But you've also proven to yourself that today's going to be a good day.
Yeah.
So there's, like, two different sides. There's the psychological side and also the fact that you've ticked it off and literally got it done. But the way I do things with this kind of split up to-do list is that these quick ticks are under 5 minutes. The tasks are 5 to 30 minutes and the projects are 30 minutes plus.
Right.
And every morning, no matter what I have to do, I will split my to-do list into this. And, like, you can kid yourself that it's going to take longer than a to-do list, but it's categorically not. You're still just writing things down. You're just putting them into their pre-aligned place. And then what you're going to do is you're going to choose out of those, so it can be from any category, you're going to choose 3 non-negotiables. And the reason for this, again, is it's the dopamine thing, but it's also that it's so easy to look at a huge list, whether it's split up into categories or not, and feel completely overwhelmed and feel like, oh my God, I can't get this done today. And the whole point is that actually probably if you chose 3 things on that list and you got them done and they weren't all quick ticks, that would be a successful day.
Oh,
but
hugely.
But what so many people do is they get this kind of fear and you end up procrastinating by either doing less important tasks or by just looking at it and being like, oh my God, there's so much to do. And it's like, take it 3 ticks at a time. Like, honestly, just 3 ticks at a time. But work out by the end of this day, which are the 3 things in that to-do table, which is what we call it. What are those 3 things in that to-do table that you absolutely need to have got done?
Heaven.
And it just what it does is it not only gives you the dopamine you need of being able to, like, prove that you've ticked things off, which a to-do list does anyway, but it's a little bit more weighted so that you are not getting confused with, like, you need 20 things to do. You have 20 things to do. You actually have about 5 important things to do and 10 things that are, like, running to the post office or whatever it might be. But it also just, like, you prove to yourself again and again and again that, like, today doesn't need to be big. It doesn't need to be getting everything done. But what it does, like, what it cannot be is you spending day after day after day getting overwhelmed at how many things there are that need to be done rather than, like, breaking that down
and feeling
into
worse because you haven't done them.
Yeah.
There's nothing worse. Like, I've got one thing on my list that I keep thinking, oh God, and it's still on the same bloody post-it and it hasn't gone, and I know that if I just do it tomorrow, which I can, I'll feel so much lighter and better. We underestimate that amazing feeling.
And we underestimate as well proving to ourselves on, like, a micro level that, like, we can do it. And like, it sounds so, like, childish and it sounds so like, but we do. Like, you have a really hard day, you finish the day, you feel drained, you get home, you're dreading the next day already. You get up in the morning, you need to prove to yourself that you can do today before you start proving to yourself that you can't.
Yeah.
And that's what writing down this to-do table and those 3 non-negotiables do. Like, that's literally all it is.
Yeah.
And if you're the type of person that needs to eat the frog as well and you need to, like, do the worst task first, like, you know how good you'll feel tomorrow if you do that task first thing.
Yeah, I love it. I mean, you're totally speaking my language, and here to pen and paper because it is the absolute bee's knees.
Yeah, and you feel it as well. Like, I'm a pen and paper person through and through. I use the planners literally every day of my life.
Yeah,
I
it's a
accidentally
dream.
left it at the office on Thursday night and I literally had to find an old one
Yeah.
in
I
order
once
to be
left
able to trace
this.
over the top.
I left this notepad with all my things in at the O2 after I'd done a talk. And I was like, I can't make out what room I'm in. Who am I? How do I work? Like, it was horrendous. One final point because there will be people who will have specifically listened to this episode who are startups, who want their business to thrive, who want to see progress and growth and don't know where to start. Is there, this is a frustrating question, one I'm sure you've been asked a million times, but is there one piece of practical advice you would suggest to people who feel a bit lost in the enormity of starting a business and wanting to grow it?
Yes, absolutely. I think that you've kind of already said it in the way that, like, so many people feel so terrified to start. And I look back at every single early product or website or whatever, and I am deeply, deeply embarrassed. If that was our thing now, I would fire myself.
Babe, but have you got YouTube videos of you presenting at the age of 16 on the internet?
No,
you want to cringe at that? I can't delete those. So don't be cringing at your gorgeous little PDFs. Don't even be cringing at that stuff.
But that's the exact point, is you need to just start.
Yeah.
Like, you need to just start. And I know that that's, like, the most infuriating piece of advice ever. But, like, I'll make it a bit more practical. I don't think so. I think that you need to prove to yourself you can start, first of all. And you won't do that until you've actually done it. But also, I think that so many businesses never start because they have this, like, end goal product where they're like, I want to change this entire industry. And, like, unless you've had a previous exit or you're really rich or whatever it might be, you're probably not going to get the funding to be able to actually start with what your end product is. And, like, to use Shreddy, my other business, as an example, we started with PDFs. 3 years in, we became an app and the app is always what I wanted to do. I wanted to do an app that would mean that you could put in your preferences around working out and it would give you your perfect workout plan. That's what I always wanted to do, but we couldn't afford to do it. We needed to do those PDFs to get enough money to make the app. And actually, the thing is that the second you release something, you're going to realise everything that was wrong with it anyway. So if you've spent all of that money to develop that product, you're not collecting information until it's actually out there. So why I say just start is not just to prove to yourself and not just to get something out there, but because it will probably disprove what you think the next step is or what you think the end goal is. And you cannot know that until you've actually put it out to a real life audience. So yes, like, spend as much time as you need, like, gathering information, tell everyone your idea, see what they think of it. The criticisms that come up again and again, they're a blessing. Refine and hone your concept, move on, bring the better version to the next person you talk to. Literally talk to people as much as possible. That's the first stage of starting, because once you've told people you're doing something as well, you're going to feel like you really need to do it. But then also, whether it is literally just getting a survey out to your target customers, like, it doesn't need to be placing an order with the supplier. It can just be, like, get some information by your target customers. Yes, you can do that by getting the product to them and getting the information back on their feedback, but you don't even need to do that. You can set up a survey. You know your target customer. You know who you're selling to. Go into a Facebook group of that target customer with a survey about the product that you want to create and specific issues they're having around similar products and why they would buy it and if they wouldn't buy it and what price range they would do and what colour they would like and all of these different things. That is starting. Starting does not need to be complex, but it just needs to be movement. It needs to be movement in the right direction. And I think so many people... And actually, I did a survey of my audience because I wanted to see, like, what stage people were at in the journey, whether they were employed or self-employed or entrepreneurs or whatever it might be. There was such a huge amount of people who had an idea but didn't know how to start. And I want to do stuff with that, like, and I want to make that better. But the first thing I can say to everyone is, like, get something material and get some feedback. Yeah. Like, that is the best thing you can do. It doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. And the best thing about that is that you can find out it doesn't work before you've spent tens of thousands on it, potentially. And then you can move on to the next one. Yeah. But you cannot get that until you start. Just start and move in any direction. It's better than being static. Exactly. And get a pen and paper and get those lists written, because lists are everything. They're everything. Grace, I mean, I could literally talk to you for about a week because I've got so many things I'm just personally interested in, sort of moving into the business
thing with the happy place and everything. It's all very interesting to me. So it's been great talking to you. I really hope that we see positive movement in terms of that awful disparity we talked about at the top of the conversation. It's brilliant that you're shouting about it and helping the momentum and moving us in the right direction with it all. And I wish you all the luck with it.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.